Hello, my name is Zarit. I would like to present my project assignment. The title that I chose is Factors of Government Expenses, Net Foreign Direct Investment, Private Consumption and Unemployment on GDP Growth. Prepared for Dr. Wan Nurahini Azmi and prepared by Zarit Zaidah with matrix number 122222554. This is my table of content which contain abstract for page number 2, chapter 1, introduction for the page number 2, chapter 2, literature reviews for the page 3 and 4, chapter 3, data and methodology for the page 4 until 5, chapter 4 is the result from the page number 6 until page number 20. Now we move to the abstract. I start with my aim for this project. In this case, the topic will be about the gross domestic product, GDP, and factors affecting the issue. Some of the factors that has been chosen are private consumption change, government expenses, net foreign direct investment, and unemployment. This research is done to show the significance. The set reason with the title of the topic. Next, we move to the introduction. Chapter 1. Introduce gross domestic product, GDP as a key indicator used to assess a country's economic performance over time. It measures the monetary value of goods and services produced, reflecting the economic well-being of both governmental and non-governmental sectors. Although not all productive activities are included in GDP calculation, such as household service, GDP is adjusted for inflation using a price deflator to enable comparisons across different periods. However, the GDP per capita may not accurately reflect the well-being, as it overlooks factors that contribute to personal quality of life. Additionally, a higher GDP often correlates with increased environmental damage and external costs, highlighting some limitation of GDP as a comprehensive measures of prosperity. And then we move to the chapter 2. Chapter 2 is literature. GDP growth can be seen due to data that will be released per quarter or end of the year, since it takes some time to examine the ups and downs one's economy health. In 2024, the United States Department of Commerce has released a statistic where it shows the GDP every quarter of the year, and it is confirmed that it has been increased by 3.0% in the 6 months of said years and increased even more by 3.1% by the third estimate. While for Malaysia, the economy was down since the official has stated that the expansion by 5.3% by the third quarter of 2024, but 5.9% from previous quarter. Private consumption change. Private consumption change is one of the largest domestic demand component of Malaysia economy. It refers to the amount of money that flows into household products and services. The income of one's family play a big role in this case, including their wealth, will respond positively with their private consumption. Next, government expenses. When the government spends on services and goods, the spending will then contribute to the economy, which then will indicate how big the government size and its approach to providing services. Even though it is seen that it is fully on the government, the money is also part of citizen involvement due to taxes and public works done by them. Since there are limits on the amount, the budgets for the goods and services are highly affect the growth of the economy health and should be set accordingly. Next, unemployment. The rate of unemployment reduces the growth of GDP since it indicates underutilized resources. There are a lot of graduates from different education levels, while there are too little accepted applicants looking for jobs. In this highly educated citizen who have spent their time not doing the jobs they spend money on education. Next, net foreign direct investment. Foreign direct investment (FDI) is the term used for when a capital of a country invests in a business in another country. Inward FDI refers to the amount of money a country receives from foreign investor, while outward FDI is the opposite, where the country spends money in investing to foreign investors. The net FDI is the difference and changes between those two. FDI is not the same with foreign portfolio investment (FPI), where investors buy and sell services to another country. Next, we continue with Chapter 3. Chapter 3, Data and Methodology. This study aims to measure the significance of the factors, which include private consumption, net foreign direct investment (FDI), government expenses, and employment, with the GDP growth. This research used 50 datasets that has been extracted from a reliable source, which is the website of Bank Negara Malaysia. The dependent variable of the study is the GDP, while the said factors are the independent variables. I choose GDP growth as the dependent variable. The growth is measured by comparing the recent period of the time with the previous one. The difference between those two periods then shows the shrinking or advancing economy of the country. A huge difference in the growth may indicate a huge downfall or an uprising, which then could affect the way the country looks to others. And then I choose these four variables for my independent variable, which is private consumption. As stated before, not only this is the most dominant aspect in GDP growth of the nation, it is also resilient towards any other external factors that could shock the growth. Since 2000, on average, private consumption has exceeded overall economic growth, and its measure has been 1.8% higher than any others. Next, government expenses, the expenditure of goods and services by federal, state, and local governments, excluding transfer payments and interest on debts, could wildly affect nation's growth, even though it will not be as effective as private consumption. Transfer payment is not included as it doesn't involve purchases. Next, unemployment. According to Okun's law, the relationship between this aspect with GDP is inverse, where if one decreases, the other one will be the opposite. When the economy is doing well, more people are needed. When the job applications are not fulfilled, then it will negatively affect the condition of one's economy, which then will cause a decrease in GDP. And FDI. Financial flows involve the transaction between intercompany, the investment of earnings, and equity transaction. There are two types of flows in FDI, which are inward and outward, which represent the increasement and decreasement of the investment between foreign investors and residents of the country. So, as shown is my regression model. B0 plus B1, which is government expenses, plus B2, net FDI, plus B3, private consumption, and plus B4, unemployment. We move to chapter 4 for the result. As discussed in previous chapter, the data used are 50 data set which represent data in Malaysia. We use data from the official website of Bank Negara Malaysia to calculate accurate numerical values for our country. The descriptive analysis is shown on display. The table is used to find important elements, such as mean, calculated by finding the sum of all and divided by the total numbers. Median, mode, and some others. Median is midpoint, and the mode is the most common number that appears in the data. The mean, median, and the mode are the three most important elements, since it is used to measure the sample tendency, variation, and measure the graph shape of the data. To answer question number 1, overall, since there are only two variables showing the presence of outliers, it shows that all variables, dependent and independent, are distributed symmetrically. With the explanation above, it is confirmed that the dataset are balanced with no extreme outliers. The next measurement will be explained is the standard deviation for each variable, which calculate the dispersion of data, where a bigger number indicates the more variability. These all represent their trends with the GDP growth, where it shows unemployment is in the most stable trends with minimal variability, while net FDI and government expenses are the factors that could cause the most fluctuation in the economy. The metric of the screeners represent the degree of asymmetrical and deviation relation to the data sets. The government expenses and private consumption show positive skew, while the other two factors, net FDI and unemployment, show a nearly symmetric one. Kurtosis includes a lot of varieties, which are mesocritic distribution, which is moderate kurtosis, medium tails, platykurtic, low kurtosis, and thin tails, and leptokurtic, high kurtosis. Since all variables show fewer to no extreme values, it then indicates negative kurtosis with flat distribution with shorter tail. Next is the correlation between all independent variables with the dependent variables to find out how significant they are to the GDP growth. If they correlate well, that means it will be affected when one undergoes a specific change. To answer question number 2, according to the calculation that must be done, the GDP growth has a positive correlation with government expenses, net FDI, and private consumption, leaving out unemployment. This indicates the higher the number in the unemployment rates, the more negatively impact the GDP growth, while the government expenses are weakly correlated with the GDP growth. The significance of private consumption and net FDI are very much high, which means the higher the rate for these two variables, the higher the growth of GDP. In this regression analysis, the variation inflation factors, VIF, works as an indicators of the extent multicollinearity, where the multicollinearity happens when there are more than one independent variables in a regression model are highly correlated. To answer question number 3 and 4, the multicollinear regression is run and shown as on display. With a 50 dataset samples, there are squared values of 0.166 indicates that the multiple linear regression model explains approximately 16.66% of the variability in the GDP growth and explained by the independent variable. The government expenses are positively correlated with the GDP, while the net FDI is indirectly correlated. This also applies to both private consumption and unemployment respectively. By looking at each variable, the intercept, which also can be seen as the baseline for all variables with the GDP growth, is at 0.0399 for every unit of government expenses and private consumption. The GDP growth will be affected increasingly by 2.768 times 10 power of negative 7 and 2.293 times 10 power of negative 7. However, for every increased unit of the net FDI, the GDP will decrease approximately negative 3.401 times 10 power of negative 8, while it will decrease by 0.00127 for unemployment. To answer question number 5, the variance of slope coefficient has calculated and shown as on the display. Residual variance stated in the table is mean squared error. Residual variance already stated in the table, which is it's a mean squared error, MSE, 4.02379 times 10 power of negative 5. Residual variance is important because it is the average squared deviation of the observed values from the fitted values. To answer question number 6, estimated variance of the slope coefficient is directly proportional to the residual variance. This shows the higher the number for the estimated variance of the slope coefficient, the higher the residual variance. This indicates lesser precise estimates and vice versa. To answer question number 7, we will conduct the one-sided and two-sided test for each variable. For two-sided test, if p-value less than 0.05, which is the significant level, it is significant, which we need to reject the null hypothesis. If p-value is more than 0.05, it is not significant, so we are failed to reject the null hypothesis. We look into one by one variable, starting with the government expenses. For the two-sided test, the t statistic is 1.057 with the t critical 2.0141. Decision rule reject H naught if t statistic more than t critical. Conclusion: for two-sided test, t statistic is 1.057 less than t critical. Thus, we fail to reject the null hypothesis and conclude that the government expenses is not significant on GDP growth at 5% significant level. For one-sided test, for the same variable, government expenses, t statistics still the same, 1.057, and the t critical is negative 1.67. Decision rule reject H naught if t statistic more than t critical. Conclusion: for one-sided test, t statistic is 1.057, which is more than t critical. Thus, we reject the null hypothesis and conclude that the government expenses is significant on the GDP growth at 5% significant. Same goes to the net FDI. For the two-sided test, the t statistic is negative 0.0540, where the t critical is 2.0141. Conclusion: for the two-sided test, t statistic is negative 0.0541, which is less than t critical. Thus, we fail to reject the null hypothesis and conclude that the net foreign direct investment is not significant on GDP growth at 5% significance level. For one-sided test, for the variable net FDI, for one-sided test, t statistic is negative 0.0540, which is less than t critical. Thus, we fail to reject the null hypothesis and conclude that the net foreign direct investment is not significant on GDP growth at 5% significance level. Next, we move to variable fiber consumption for the two-sided test. For the two-sided test, the statistic is 0.1294, which is less than t critical. Thus, we fail to reject the null hypothesis and conclude that private consumption is not significant on GDP growth at 5% significant level. We move to the one-sided test for the same variable. For one-sided test, the statistic is 0.1294, which is more than t critical. Thus, we reject the null hypothesis and conclude that the private consumption is significant on GDP growth at 5% significant level. We move to the next variable, which is unemployment for two-sided test. For the two-sided test, the statistic is negative 0.2466, which is less than the t critical. Thus, we fail to reject the null hypothesis and conclude that unemployment is not significant on GDP growth at 5% significant level. We move to the one-sided test for the same variable. For one-sided test, t statistic is negative 0.2466, which is more than t critical. Thus, we reject the null hypothesis and conclude that unemployment is significant on GDP growth at 5% significance level. To answer question number 8, we need to calculate 50% confidence interval for each variable and compare them to the answer from question number 7. Here, how we calculate confidence interval. Remove one by one for each variable, starting with the government expenses. The T statistic for government expenses is 1.057, and the zero is fall within the CI confident interval range. Makes the government expenses is not statistically significant. For the net FDI, the T statistic for the net FDI is negative 0.0540, and the zero fall within the CI range. Makes the net FDI is not statistically significant. Move to the next variable, which is private consumption. The T statistic for the private consumption is 0.1294, and the zero is fall within the CI range. Make the private consumption is not statistically significant. Move to the next variable, unemployment. The T statistic for unemployment is negative 0.2466, and the zero is fall within the CI range. Makes the unemployment is not statistically significant. So we can conclude that there are none of all the variables that has been chosen for this study is significant GDP growth. There may be other variable that is significant since none of these are directly affected, since all the calculation has been done and they are already incorporated. To answer question number 9, the R squared needs to be calculated manually and compared with the given R in the multiple linear equation. The value for the R squared is negative 0.1666. Meanwhile, the adjusted R squared that we already calculated above is 0.09252. R squared value shows 0.166, which means it is approximately 16.66% of the variance of the dependent variable is affected by the independent variables. The adjusted R squared value then shows 0.0925, which is a lot lower than the value of R squared. This shows there are more significant value that is not been chosen for the equation. The independent variables do give impact to the GDP growth, but just not as much as it is expected. This could also be because of there are unnecessary variable is included in the calculation, making it is hard to prove the effects that could affect the GDP growth. The higher the R squared values, the higher the value of goodness of it, which could also mean the included variables are highly correlated with the dependent variable. Since both the real values and the adjusted values of R squared shows even number, it is then confirmed that the factors are not highly contributed to the GDP growth. We will be comparing the newest and previous MLR to answer the last question, which is question number 10 for this study. Equation below shows the equation are shown with previous MLR GDP growth equal to 0.0399 plus 2.768 times 10 power of negative 7 x1 plus negative 3.401 times 10 power of negative 8 x2 plus 2.293 times 10 power of negative 7 x3 plus negative 0.00127 for x4. Newest MLR GDP growth 0.03959 plus 2.652 times 10 power of negative 7 x1 plus negative 3.756 times 10 power of negative 8 x2 plus 2.434 times 10 power of negative 7 x3. We discard one of the lowest contribution factors, which is unemployment. After that, it shows that even with the absence of it, it doesn't affect the equation. This factor is the least affecting factors since the real value of R squared does not seem to be that much of a difference. That's all presentation for me. Thank you so much.